The Trumpet of the Swan, Chapter 5, Lewis. All right, everybody settled in? Everybody got somebody to sit next to? One evening, a few weeks later, when the cygnets were asleep, Mama Swan said to the cob, "Have you noticed anything different about one of our children, the one we call Lewis?" "Different?" replied the cob. "In what way is Lewis different from his brothers and sisters?" "Lewis looks all right to me. He's growing up well, he swims and dives beautifully, he eats well, and he'll soon have his flight feathers." "Oh, he looks all right," said this Mama Swan, "and heaven knows he eats enough. He's healthy and bright and a great swimmer. But have you ever heard Lewis make any sound, as the others do? Have you ever heard him use his voice or say anything? Have you heard him utter a single beep or a single burble?" Come to think of it, I never have," said the cob, who was beginning to look worried. "Have you ever heard Lewis say good night to us, as the others do? Have you ever heard him say good morning, as the others do, in their charming little way, bubbling and burping?" "Now that you mention it, I never have," said the cob. "Goodness, what are you getting at? Do you wish me to believe that we have a son who is different than the others?" "Such a revelation would distress me greatly. I want everything to go smoothly in my family life, so that I can glide gracefully and serenely, now in the prime of my life, without being haunted or worried or disappointed. Fatherhood is quite a burden at best. I do not want the added strain of having a different kind of a child that has something that's different than the others." "Well," said the Mama Swan, "I've been watching Lewis lately, and it is my opinion that the little fellow can't talk. I've never heard him make one sound. I think he came into the world lacking a voice. If he had a voice, he would use it like the others do." "Why, this is terrible," said the cob. "This is distressing beyond words. This is a very serious matter." His wife looked at him in amusement. "It's not too serious now," she said, "but it will be serious 2 or 3 years from now, when Lewis falls in love, as he surely will do. A young male swan will be greatly handicapped in finding a mate if he's unable to say caw-caw, caw-caw, or if he can't utter the usual endearments to the young female of his choice." "Are you sure?" said the cob. "Certainly I'm sure," she replied. "I can remember perfectly well, in the springtime years ago, when you fell in love with me and began chasing after me. What a sight you were, and what a lot of noise you made. It was in Montana, remember?" "Of course I remember," said the cob. "Well, the thing that attracted me most was your voice, your wonderful voice." "It was?" said the cob. "Yes, you had the finest, most powerful, most resonant voice of any of the young male swans in the Red Lakes National Wildlife Refuge in Montana." "I did?" said the cob. "Yes, indeed. Every time I heard you say something in that deep voice of yours, I was ready to go anywhere with you." "You were?" said the cob. He was obviously delighted with his wife's praise. It tickled his vanity, and it made him feel great. He had always fancied himself having a fine voice, and now to hear it from his wife's own lips was a thrill. In the pleasure of the moment he forgot all about Lewis and thought entirely about himself. And of course he did remember that enchanted springtime on the lake in Montana when he'd fallen in love. He remembered how pretty the swan had been, how young and innocent she seemed, and how attractive and desirable. Now he realized fully that he would never been able to get her as a wife if he'd been unable to say anything. "We'll not worry about Lewis for the time being," said the Mama Swan. "He's still very young, but we must watch him next winter, when we're in Montana for the season. We must stay together as a family until we see how Lewis makes out." She walked over to where her sleeping cygnets were settled down and sat down next to them. The night was chilly. She carefully lifted one wing and covered the cygnets with it. They stirred in their deep sleep and stirred warm next to her. The cob stood quietly, thinking about what his wife had just told him. He was a brave, noble bird, and already he was beginning to work out a plan for his little son Louis. "If it's really true that Louis has no voice," said the cob to himself, "then I shall provide him with a device of some sort to enable him to make a lot of noise. There must be some way out of this difficulty. After all, my son is a trumpeter swan. He shall have a voice like a trumpet. But first I will test him to make sure that what his mother says is true." Well, the cob was unable to sleep that night. He stood on one leg quietly, but sleep never came. Next morning, after everyone had enjoyed a good breakfast, he led Louis away from the others. "Louis," he said, "I wish to speak to you alone. Let's just you and I take a swim by ourselves to the other end of the pond, where we can talk privately without being interrupted." Louis was surprised by this, but he nodded his head and followed his father, swimming strongly in his wake. He did not understand why his father wanted to speak to him alone, without his brothers and sisters. "Now," said the cob when they reached the upper end of the pond, "here we are gracefully floating, supremely buoyant, at some distance from the others, in perfect surroundings. A fine morning with a quiet pond, except for the song of the blackbirds making music in the sweet air." "I wish my father would get to the point," thought Louis. "This is an ideal place for our conference," continued the cob. "There is something I feel I should discuss with you very candidly and openly, something that concerns your future. We do not need to range over the whole spectrum of bird life, but just confine our little talk to one essential thing that is before us on this unusual occasion." "Oh, I wish my father would get to the point," thought Louis, who by this time was getting very nervous. "It has come to my attention, Louis," continued the cob, "that you rarely say anything. In fact, I can't recall ever hearing you utter a sound. I never heard you speak or say caw or to cry out, either in fear or in joy. This is most unusual for a young trumpeter. This is serious, Louis. Let me hear you say beep. Go ahead and say it. Say beep." And here is the father with Louis. Poor Louis. While his father watched, he took a deep breath, opened his mouth, and let the air out, hoping it would say beep. But there wasn't a sound. "Try again," said Louis. "Perhaps you're not making enough of an effort." Well, Louis tried again. It was no dice. Nothing came out. No noise at all. And he shook his head. "Watch me," said the cob, and he raised his neck to full height, and he cried "Go-go" so loud it was heard by every other creature for miles around. "Now let me hear you say beep," he commanded. "Say beep, Louis, loud and clear." Louis tried. He tried, but he couldn't beep. "Let me hear you bubble. Go ahead and bubble, like this, bubble, bubble, bubble." Louis tried to bubble, but he couldn't do it. No sound came out. "Well," said the cob, "I guess it's no use. I guess you don't have a voice." Well, when Louis heard this, he felt very sad, and the cob saw that he had hurt Louis's feelings. "You misunderstand me, my son. I called that you don't have a voice to help you. I actually think you are the brightest, smartest, most intelligent of all my cygnets. Words sometimes have many meanings, and I would like to help you. Do you understand?" Louis nodded his head. He felt better, and he was grateful to his father for explaining. Anyway, he was very upset that he couldn't make any sound. "Do not let a sadness come over you, son," said the cob. "Swans must be cheerful, not sad, and graceful, not awkward, brave, not cowardly. Remember that the world is full of youngsters who have some kind of a difference, and your difference is that you're going to need help to make a sound. There may be some slight advantage, even at your age, not being able to say anything. It means you must be a good listener. The world is full of talkers, but it is rare to find anyone who listens. And I assure you that I can pick up more information when you're listening than when you're talking." "My father does quite a lot of talking himself," thought Lewis. "Some people," continued the cob, "go through life chattering and making a lot of noise with their mouth, and they never really listen to anything. They're too busy expressing their opinion, which often are unsound or based on bad information. Therefore, my son, be of good cheer. Enjoy life, learn to fly, eat well, drink well, use your ears, and I promise someday I will make it possible for you to use your voice. There are mechanical devices that convert air into beautiful sounds. One such device is called a trumpet. I saw a trumpet once in my travels. I think you may need a trumpet in order to live a full life. I've never known a trumpet or swan to need a trumpet, but in your case, you're different. I intend to get you what you need. I don't know how I will manage this, but in the fullness of time it shall be accomplished. And now that our little talk has come to a close, let's return gracefully to the other end of the pond, where your mother and your brothers and your sisters await us." The cob turned and swam off, and Lewis followed. It had been an unhappy morning for him. He had felt frightened at being different than his brothers and sisters. It scared him to be different. He couldn't understand why he didn't have a voice like everyone else. He thought, "Boy, this is strange," but his father promised to help, and he felt better. Soon they joined the others and started water games, and Lewis joined in, dipping and splashing and diving and twisting. Lewis could splash water further than any of the others, but he couldn't shout while he was doing it. To be able to shout while you're splashing water is half the fun. And that's the end of that chapter.